Of all of the books, I guess, in the Old Testament, the ones that are most neglected are the books of Ecclesiastes on forward to the Old Testament prophets. We very seldom read that type of kind of literature. The book of Ecclesiastes is one of the most unique books in the entire Bible. It carries with it some messages, plural by the way. It carries with it some messages which are of great practical value today. And so as I was thinking about this, I thought, what kind of a title can I give to this sermon? And I thought, well, he talked so much about accomplishments that didn't mean anything. So I entitled the sermon, Meaningless Accomplishments. Well, as I was trying to develop this in my mind, I thought, there's one great meaningless accomplishment that comes to mind, and I looked it up on the internet, and I found a number of pictures of bridges to nowhere. If you remember, not too terribly long ago, there was a pretty big scandal about a bridge that had been built to nowhere. It had no roads, no highways or anything like that. It was just a bridge built out there, and there was just a political gain to certain people by having that bridge built. Then I went and looked at other situations of bridges to nowhere, and I found out that in many countries of the world, there are bridges that are built that have no roads to them at all. And it was kind of a strange thing to me that such a thing as this would ever even happen. And of course, it did, and it still does. Too many people today are looking for meaning in their lives, and their lives really constitute bridges to nowhere. They really don't see any meaning to life. They're not successful in life a lot of times. They're not happy. They have very few friends and things like this. And so their lives are kind of like this whole idea of bridges to nowhere. They have accomplishments in their lives, but the accomplishments didn't really give the meaning to their lives at all. And so I just stopped and thought, well, what does the book of Ecclesiastes have to say about this whole idea? Well, like I say, all over the world there are these bridges to nowhere, and all over the world there are people whose lives are so very, very much the same way. How is my life doing? What is my life turning on? What is real, deep, honest-to-goodness meaning in my life? And there's so many people that are fishing for that, and they're searching for that, and they search for it in all kinds of different places, except the place where it's found. It's kind of like a little story. Of course, this never happened, in fact, but there was a man who lost the keys to his car, and it was dark outside and so forth, and he was looking all through the house and everywhere, and somebody said, well, what are you looking for? He had some friends over. Said, what are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for the keys to my car. I lost them. He said, where did you lose them? He said, well, I lost them someplace outside. He said, why aren't you out there looking for them? He said, well, there's more light in here. Well, of course, that doesn't make any sense at all. I don't think anybody would ever have done a thing like that. And yet, when it comes to the idea of finding true meaning in life, that so much of the time is the type of thing that takes place. What are people looking, what things are people looking at and looking for to add meaning to their lives? Well, I wrote down 7 different things that just came to me as I was studying over this. One is a high position in an important industry. I'd like to be the captain of the ship. I'd like to be the CEO of this company. I would like to be the president of that company, or something like that. If I could just get to that position, life would be wonderful. Well, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Some people like authority. Some people like to be the boss. If you don't believe it, go and ask somebody, where do you work? Well, I work at such and such a place. What is your position? Well, I have 5 men under me that I supervise. You know what that basically says? I like the idea of having people below me. Somehow or another, being in a position of authority where I can say this is right and this is wrong, do it this way, don't do it that way, I get a certain amount of satisfaction out of that because I'm the boss. Well, that's what some people look at. Many people look at wealth. Many people look at education. Other people look at entertainment and parties. It's just going from one party to another, popularity and fame and all of these things. And people are searching for meaning in their lives so much of the time by pursuing these types of things. Well, each one of these things may have some satisfaction to it. And I'm not trying to say that any of these things are wrong. But when those things become the source of meaning in my life, then they do become wrong. Now, I'm not trying to say that everything that I do in life has to be related to enhancing the meaning in my life. That isn't the idea at all. But the idea is this. Position can be taken away from me. When position is taken away from me, if my meaning in my life depends on that, then the meaning of my life diminishes, doesn't it? It takes something out of my life. We're going to see how the writer here of Ecclesiastes, how he shows us and tells us about what really turns out to be the root meaning in life. Well, if someone can take away the things that give meaning to my life, and my life meaning diminishes because of this, what can I do about it? How can I change my life so that my life becomes something that really does have a depth of meaning? This morning in the Bible class, the Sunday morning Bible class, I mentioned a Jewish philosopher, a Jewish psychiatrist and doctor by the name of Viktor Frankl. I want to talk about him for just a moment because something that he's had to say in a book that he wrote played a very important role in some of the things that come out of Ecclesiastes. He was born in 1905. He died in 1997. He went through the Second World War as a German Jew, and he was put in the concentration camp at Auschwitz. I remember when I was in Germany some time ago, we visited one of the concentration camps at Dachau, and we saw the horrible, terrible circumstances that those people were subjected to. And some of the photographs, the pictures that showed them were really just unbelievably horrible. Well, Auschwitz was the epitome of horror. And that's where Viktor Frankl was put. His wife was put somewhere else. One of the things that he noticed was that when sometimes very strong men came into the concentration camp as inmates, and they were abused and they were treated roughly and they were starved and all this sort of thing, that some of those very strong men just shrank up to nothing and finally died. And then he noticed that once in a while there'd be somebody who was kind of frail looking, someone who was kind of skinny and scrawny, you know, but he survived. And being a psychiatrist, he couldn't help but wonder, how is it that this sort of thing happens? The strong fail and the weak succeed. The strong die and the weak survive. And he began noticing something that he wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. What did he write? He said that, among other things, there were two that were outstanding to me as I read the book many years ago. He said, when a person learns to give himself in service to someone else, life begins to take meaning, not because of what he's accomplishing, but because he has made the free choice of serving someone who needs to be served. of helping someone who needs to be helped. And you notice that some of the inmates would help some of the other inmates who were in dire circumstances. And this did something for both of them, because that person was giving himself in service. And the other thing that he mentioned was that one day this horrible experience will be over. And we who have survived, he said, we will be needed by other people. Our families, our wives, our husbands, our children, other friends, and so forth. We will be needed. And that sense of knowing that I'm needed was a part of the key to his survival. Well, if I serve only to gain something for myself, then my service is poorly founded. But if I serve in order to be of help to others, that service is well-founded. Now, let's just notice a few things that the book of Ecclesiastes has to say along this line. I want to read from Ecclesiastes, the first chapter. After he introduces this himself, he says the words of the teacher or the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. That's a pretty bad setting, isn't it, for him to start off with? Well, there's something very pessimistic about this book, but there's something about it that's very optimistic, because he doesn't leave us hanging talking about how meaningless this, that, or the other thing might be. He gives us the solution. And so he goes on and talks about the problem. He says, what does man gain from all of his labor, at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and it hurries back to where it rises again. The wind blows to the south, and it turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea is never full. To the place that the streams come from, there they also return. All things are wearisome, more than anyone can say. The eye is never has enough seeing, and the ear is never filled of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, oh, look, there is something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Ooh, boy, that's a terrible scene, isn't it? That's a terrible scene, the way he describes this. He talks about how the earth has all of these things happening in it, the flowing of the rivers and the rising of the sun and the winds blowing and all this sort of thing. And to him, as he's describing these things, they're worrisome. They're meaningless. They don't have anything to them. And he's trying to describe something to us. It seems that here is a man without God. And he's going to show later that God is the key to the solution of all of these things. Well, life to some people is very harsh. And he has talked about that in this. Life is very tough. Life is very, very harsh to some people. Some people find all kinds of negative things in life. On the other hand, it's kind of like this story that I've told you a number of times, some of you. Many, many years ago, when a person bought a car, he got a little grease gun with the car, and so he could do his own grease jobs, you know. I remember that. I'm a little older than most of you, but I remember that. And there was this fellow who had a car had a little truck, and he backed the truck up and it went into a ditch, and the two front wheels just propped themselves up. And this man was supposed to be very optimistic, and somebody says, well, where's your optimism now? And he said, it sure will be a good time to give it a grease job, wouldn't it? So the whole idea it was that in the negative, he could see a positive. In the thing that was difficult, he could see opportunity. And so this is a part of the groundwork that the writer is laying for us here in this great book of Ecclesiastes. Some people pursue wisdom, he says, beginning with the 12th verse of the chapter. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore wisdom and all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. Well, he goes on and says, I've seen all things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind, or vexation of the spirit. The King James Version and some of the others say, but a chasing after the wind. Can you imagine the futility of chasing the wind? I remember one time I chased a rainbow. And, somehow or another, there's a challenge to that, but it offers nothing in the end, does it? And so chasing rainbows and chasing the wind, there's such futility here. And so he goes on in the 15th verse and he says, what is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who ever ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. And then I applied myself to understanding of wisdom and also the madness of folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. What is his trouble? He's doing the very things that people today are doing. He's doing the things that people of every generation have been doing for centuries and centuries. And then he says, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow, and more knowledge, the more the knowledge, the more the grief. Well, what a dim view of life he's painting for us. He's telling us so many things that people get themselves into, that people pursue in their lives that are bridges to nowhere. They don't accomplish what the people set out to accomplish with them. Let's go on and read a little bit further. In chapter 2, the first 3 verses, here's what he says. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughing, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. My mind still guided me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under the heaven during the few days of their lives. Well, he just pursued all kinds of things. Hey, folks, living here in Burbank, living in the Los Angeles area, living in California, such heavy emphasis on entertainment, such heavy emphasis on the whole thing of parties and satisfying myself. And yes, we're a cultural center, and there's also a great emphasis on the idea of education. And so all of these things put together, I pursue this, I pursue that, I pursue the other thing, whatever fancy I might have, and lo and behold, I find out that these things are worthless. They do not accomplish a thing in the world. Well, look at verse 4. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves and to flourishing trees. I brought male and female slaves and other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers, and a harem as well. The delights of the hearts of men. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me, and all of this wisdom stayed, and with all of this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing that my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all of the work, and this was the reward for all of my labor. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. It just seemed like, wow, he had so many things going for him. All of the entertainment, the building projects, all of these things that he had accomplished, and he sits back and looks at it and says, wow, man, I have done it more than anybody before me. And then he ends up by saying, it didn't gain anything. I'm still chasing after the wind. In that respect, it's such a sad book, isn't it? It's a good thing that we don't stop right there. In my own personal opinion, I think that the writer of Ecclesiastes is trying to tell us, I have experienced all of these things. Here is the outcome of all of my own personal accomplishments. Here are the things that I find that I have done that you will find in later history even. I've done it all. I have it all. And yet he ends it all up by saying,